Before sunrise on Socotra, the trees do not look like trees. They stand on the limestone plateau as black umbrellas balanced on bare trunks, each crown turned inside out against the sky. Cut one of them, and the wound releases a resin the color of dried blood. Walk farther, and a desert rose rises from solid rock with a trunk swollen, like an elephant's leg. Nearby, a cucumber has ignored the usual rules of cucumbers and become a tree. Nothing here needs digital effects. Socotra looks alien because life has spent an absurdly long time solving familiar problems in unfamiliar ways. That is the picture most visitors carry home. A lost island full of botanical creatures, but it is only the first layer. Socotra is not an empty laboratory floating beyond history. Children go to school here. Fishermen read the wind before pushing boats into the Arabian Sea. Herding families know which valleys hold water after the clouds disappear. In the capital, Hadibo motorbikes pass concrete shops beneath satellite dishes. The strange plants are not scenery around human life. They have shaped where people settle, what they trade, how they speak about the land, and even what survival means. The island belongs to Yemen, yet on a map it seems to be reaching toward Africa. Roughly 240 kilometers of open water separate it from the Horn of Africa. Mainland Arabia lies farther away. For part of the year, monsoon winds turn the surrounding sea rough enough to make small boat travel dangerous. So the first surprise is not that rare species survived here. It is that an entire human culture did as well. On an island placed beside one of the world's busiest sea routes and still capable of feeling astonishingly remote. Even the name can mislead. Socotra is an archipelago, not a solitary speck. 4 islands and 2 rocky islets, spread across a zone about 250 kilometers long. The main island dominates every photograph, while the smaller islands are easier to forget. Together, they create separate pockets of habitat, currents, and human experience. This broken geography helps explain why counting Socotra's life is so difficult. A species may be common on one slope, absent beyond the next ridge, and unknown everywhere outside the archipelago. The numbers sound invented. UNESCO records 825 plant species across the archipelago, and 37% occur nowhere else on Earth. 90% of its reptiles are unique to these islands. The same is true of 95% of its land snails. Those animals are less famous than the dragon's blood tree, but they reveal the real scale of Socotra's separation. This is not one bizarre plant surrounded by ordinary nature. It is a complete biological sentence written in a dialect the rest of the planet does not use. And there is a darker hook hidden inside that beauty. The trees that make Socotra look timeless are not guaranteed a future. Many dragon's blood forests contain old adults, but very few young trees. Goats eat seedlings before they can rise above the rocks. Stronger cyclones tear down specimens that may have taken centuries to build their crowns. Roads, invasive species, and careless tourism press from other directions. Socotra can look ancient and fragile at the same moment. The alien world is real, but it is not safely locked in the past. It can vanish while the cameras are still admiring it. To understand how it became so strange, begin below the surface. Socotra is not a volcanic island that recently rose from the sea. Its foundation is a fragment of continental crust, with ancient granite and younger layers of limestone. Long ago, it sat against the southern edge of Arabia. Then the crust stretched, cracked, and opened into the Gulf of Aden. Water entered the growing gap. Socotra was left offshore, carrying a cargo of plants and animals that would now have to continue their journey without a land bridge home. Isolation did not place a glass dome over the island. Seeds still arrived on wind, birds, and ocean currents. Flying animals crossed the water. People brought crops and livestock, but arrival was difficult, and departure was difficult, so evolution had room to experiment. A population cut off from its relatives can slowly follow a different path. On Socotra, that process happened under severe pressure, thin soil, fierce sun, long dry periods, powerful winds, and mountains that squeeze moisture from passing air. The island did not simply preserve old life. It forced life to redesign itself. The most famous result is Dracaena cinnabari, the Socotran dragon's blood tree. From a distance, its crown resembles a mushroom cloud frozen at the moment of expansion from below. The branches divide again and again until they support a dense ceiling of stiff leaves. The shape is beautiful, but beauty is not its purpose. A broad crown intercepts fog and rain, slows the wind, and casts a concentrated patch of shade over the roots. On a dry plateau, that patch can be the difference between moisture staying in the soil and disappearing into the air. A dragon's blood forest, therefore, does more than occupy the landscape. It engineers a small climate beneath itself. Water caught by leaves and branches reaches the ground, shade protects soil organisms and young plants. Roots hold thin earth against wind and sudden rain. Birds use the crown, other species gather in the cooler space below. Remove enough mature trees, and the damage is not limited to an iconic silhouette. The island loses part of its water-catching machinery, and the community arranged around each canopy begins to unravel. Then there is the blood. When the bark is injured, the tree produces a deep red resin that hardens on contact with air. For centuries, it traveled through trade networks as dye, incense, varnish, and an ingredient in traditional remedies. The name invited legends about dragons and battles, but the resin had practical value long before the tree became an internet image. It connected a remote plateau to merchants far beyond the island. A Socotran tree could remain rooted in stone, while a piece of its hardened resin crossed seas, markets, and languages. The dragon's blood tree is only Socotra's celebrity. The desert rose may be even stranger at close range. Its pale, swollen trunk stores water, allowing the plant to endure dry months when the rock around it appears lifeless. Pink flowers can emerge from that heavy body with almost comic delicacy. It looks as if someone buried a giant root upside down and decorated it afterward. The cucumber tree performs a different trick. It belongs to the same broad family as vines that creep through vegetable gardens, yet here it grows a woody trunk and stands upright against the wind. Frankincense trees twist from cliffs and dry slopes, producing aromatic resin from wounds in their bark. Myrrh and aloe add other scents and substances to Socotra's living storehouse. These plants did not make the island rich in the modern sense, but they made it valuable to the ancient world long before air routes and travel videos. Sailors knew there were useful resins here. The island appeared in navigation accounts from the 1st century, positioned between the shores of Arabia, East Africa, and the wider Indian Ocean trade. That location explains a paradox. Socotra was isolated enough for species to diverge, yet connected enough for stories, goods, and people to circulate. Sailors from different coasts stopped near its caves and bays. Traders sought incense, aloe, and other products. Seasonal winds could close a route, then reopen it. The same sea that acted like a wall could become a road. Socotra was never outside the world. It was a difficult doorway into it, opening and closing according to weather rather than politics. The monsoon still controls the island's rhythm during the windiest period. The sea can turn white with spray and fishing becomes harder. Moist air collides with the Hajir Mountains, feeding cloud and mist at higher elevations, even while lower ground stays dry. On one side of the island, there are pale dunes pushed against cliffs. Elsewhere, freshwater pools sit inside canyons, and caves reach deep into limestone. Beaches suggest a tropical holiday. The interior can feel like a high desert. Several climates have been folded into a relatively small piece of land. This is why a quick montage creates the wrong impression. A drone flies over an empty beach, cuts to a forest, then lands on a dune, and the island seems like one continuous wilderness. In reality, those scenes may be separated by rough tracks, long drives, and abrupt changes in elevation. Villages sit outside the frame. Water has to be carried, camps depend on local labor. The apparent emptiness is partly geography and partly editing. Socotra feels vast because its landscapes change faster than the camera can explain what lies between them. Life below the water is just as important, although it rarely appears in the alien island photographs. UNESCO lists 253 reef, building coral species, 730 coastal fish species, and 300 kinds of crab, lobster, and shrimp. The archipelago lies where different marine regions meet, so warm water communities overlap in unusual ways. For coastal families, this is not an abstract catalog. The sea is food, work, weather, and danger. A reef can be a biodiversity statistic to a scientist and tomorrow's catch to a fisherman. On land, the small creatures tell the clearest evolutionary story. Reptiles and land snails do not cross open ocean easily, when almost every native species in those groups exists nowhere else. Isolation is visible at ground level. Some can live on a single mountain or in a narrow habitat. That makes them extraordinary and vulnerable. A road, an introduced predator, or a change in grazing may affect a creature most visitors never notice. The island's future cannot be measured only by whether the famous trees remain in the wide shot. Nor can Socotra be understood by pretending its residents are recent guests. People have lived with this landscape for generations, naming plants, reading seasonal signs, and carrying knowledge through speech. Many islanders speak Socotri, a South Arabian language distinct from Arabic. For much of its history, it was transmitted mainly by voice. Poetry songs, stories, and place names became a kind of moving archive. A plant could be remembered not only by its scientific description, but by the moment it should be harvested, the valley where it grows, and the verse attached to it. That oral culture matters because the island is full of information that does not fit neatly into a field guide. A herder may know where animals can graze without exhausting a slope. A resin collector knows that cutting too deeply can damage a tree. A fisherman can read a change in wind that a visitor experiences only as weather. This knowledge is not automatically perfect, and tradition does not freeze a society in place. It is a working relationship adjusted under pressure as towns expand, roads arrive, and younger people build lives connected to phones, schools, and the mainland. Hatabo makes that change visible. It is not a marble capital or a preserved village. It is crowded, dusty, and ordinary in the way real places are ordinary. Shops sell imported goods. Plastic waste gathers, where older systems were never designed to handle modern packaging. Vehicles shorten journeys that once took far longer. The contrast can disappoint travelers who arrive expecting an untouched Eden, but that disappointment says more about the fantasy than the island. Socotrans are not museum staff employed to maintain a prehistoric backdrop for foreign cameras. The tension becomes sharpest around goats. Herding is woven into local life, and goats have been present for a very long time. The problem is not a simple story in which residents suddenly introduced an animal and destroyed paradise. Researchers point to larger herds and the decline of older rotational grazing practices, which have increased pressure in some areas. A mature dragon's blood tree can survive browsing, a seedling cannot. When every tender shoot is eaten, the forest may still look full from a distance, even though its next generation is missing. That is why scientists describe some stands as overmature. The adults remain spreading their umbrellas across the plateau, but the ages underneath them are absent. Imagine a city filled with elderly residents and no children. Then imagine judging its future from a photograph of the skyline. Dragon's blood trees grow slowly. Waiting until the old canopy collapses is waiting too long, in protected enclosures, where young plants are kept beyond the reach of goats. Seedlings return. The answer is visible, but expanding it requires land, patience, and cooperation with the people who use the surrounding range. Cyclones add a more violent threat. In 2015, two powerful storms struck Socotra within the same season. Another severe cyclone followed in 2018. Trees that had endured decades of ordinary wind were uprooted. Soil and infrastructure were damaged. Coastal communities were hit hard. Climate research suggests that the Arabian Sea can support more intense tropical cyclones as ocean conditions change. For a slow-growing tree, a single extreme night can erase work that nature cannot replace within a human lifetime. Modern access brings another contradiction. Tourism can pay local guides, drivers, boat owners, and families who run camps. It can make the living forest worth more than extracted resin or cleared ground. It also concentrates tents, vehicles, rubbish, and water use in places that were not built for crowds. A beautiful photograph can attract the next visitor and the next 1,000 after that. Socotra does not need to be hidden from the world, but it cannot survive as a stage where every traveler demands the same empty frame beneath the same famous tree. Protection on paper is extensive. UNESCO says roughly 3/4 of the archipelago's land lies within nature sanctuaries, national parks, or areas of botanical importance. Yet, a boundary on a map cannot stop an invasive plant, repair a road, or raise a seedling. Conservation here works when it becomes local and specific. Fenced nurseries for young trees, community rules for campsites, guides who keep vehicles on established routes, better waste systems, and grazing plans that protect both livelihoods and regeneration. The island does not need one grand rescue. It needs many practical agreements that last. There is also a quieter effort to protect the human archive. UNESCO and Socotri scholars have recently worked with poets, researchers, and local speakers on a more unified writing system for the language. Digital keyboards have followed that will not replace oral poetry, and it should not. It gives a language long carried mainly in memory another place to live, in classrooms, messages, records, and phones. The future of Socotra is not only about keeping rare trees alive, it is about ensuring that the people who name this world can continue describing it in their own words. So why does Socotra look as if it evolved alone on another planet? Not because nothing ever reached it, and not because time stopped. It looks that way because continental breakup restricted the traffic of life. monsoon winds repeatedly closed the door. Drought rewarded storage, shade, and efficiency. Mountains harvested mist, and centuries of human use connected the island to distant markets without making it ordinary. Every strange shape is a solution. The umbrella is a water trap. The bottle is a reservoir. The red resin is a defense that became a commodity and a legend. The most honest way to see Socotra is to hold two images at once. In the first, dragon's blood trees stand against a violet sky, and the island seems untouched by the rest of Earth. In the second, a family places wire around a seedling, so a goat cannot eat it. One image creates wonder. The other explains whether the wonder will still exist. Between them sits the real Socotra, ancient but changing, isolated but never empty, visually alien and completely shaped by the same earthly forces of water, hunger, trade, memory, and care. Perhaps that is why the island stays in the mind. It does not offer proof of another planet. It makes our own planet feel unfamiliar again. A tree can drink the passing fog. A spoken poem can preserve a map. A forest can appear permanent while quietly running out of young life. Socotra's greatest illusion is that it has survived because nobody touched it. In truth, it has survived through a long negotiation between isolation and arrival use and restraint. Whether that negotiation continues will decide if the alien silhouettes remain living organisms or become only the most beautiful images of a world we noticed too late.